In this video, I'm going to show you how to place the alternator on this Buick Enclave. Let's install this brand new TRQ alternator. We first have to disconnect the battery, which is actually located underneath the back seats, or well, in between the front and the back seats. This is on the passenger side of the vehicle. To unlock the carpet so we can pull it up, you're going to want to spin these little locking tabs, peel up the carpet. Underneath this cover, you will have your battery. So what you want to do is take a T20 Torx bit and remove this bolt that holds this cover down. With that undone, you can also lift up this plastic piece. Set that aside. That will allow you to remove this cover. And here is your negative battery terminal, which we have to undo. Use a 10mm socket and loosen it up. Once you twist it a few turns, this should be able to come off of here. Set that aside safely so it cannot make connection with the battery terminal. Under the hood, we have to remove 3 10mm bolts at the front here so we can get rid of the overflow tank, the coolant overflow, and free up this AC line so we can just move it a little bit out of the way. All 3 bolts are identical, no need to keep them separate. This line can move now, that's perfect. We can create some space here. And then the coolant overflow will have a push clip retainer here. Take a trim tool and just pop this out, just like that. Now let's just disconnect this hose. This one comes from the radiator, so I'm just gonna push it off. There shouldn't be any coolant in this hose. There we go. Next, I want to remove the engine cover just so I can get a little bit more clearance over here. To do that, you have to undo the fill cap for the oil. Gently pull this up so that you don't get any debris inside the engine there. Once you pop it free, you can reinstall the oil fill cap so no debris gets in there, and then finish removing your engine cover. Set that aside. Next, I'm going to remove the front passenger's wheel. You don't necessarily have to remove it. You can just turn it out of the way so you can get access behind it to those shields, but I just find it a lot easier to remove it. If you want to remove it, use a 22mm socket and remove all 6 of your lug nuts, and then pull the wheel off. Behind the wheel, you will find this push clip at the bottom that holds part of the splash shield on. Pry that push clip out. The center, that is, and then the rest of it, and then the splash shield should come off. With that splash shield peeled off, take a 1/2" ratchet or breaker bar, slide it right inside the belt tensioner, and let's remove tension off of the belt so we can pull it off. You're going to want to push clockwise on this. There we go. Now release tension and remove your tool. Let's get the belt out of the way of our alternator here. Next, we're going to need a 15mm ratcheting wrench or socket if you can fit one in here. Remove this bolt and the pulley. This basically clamps down the alternator at the bottom, but it also holds on this idler pulley, so we have to take them both off to get the alternator freed up. If you're using a ratchet and a socket, don't get it jammed between the bolt and the frame. So once you back it off a few turns, take it out and switch to a wrench. All right, with the bolt loosened up, you won't be able to take it out because it's actually going to hit the frame here, but that's okay. It is most of the way out of the alternator, so as soon as we release the alternator, this should be able to come out. So I'm going to leave that like this. Now, let's move back up top to remove the rest of the alternator. Now from the top, you'll see a connector here on the alternator. You're going to want to pinch it and pull it off to remove this. There we go. If you have to use pliers, just be very gentle not to break it. This right here is the main power wire. Pull the boot up and off, and you'll see a mounting nut there. We have to remove that in order to disconnect that wire. It's a 13mm, so I'm going to grab a socket or a wrench. Remove the nut the rest of the way, and pull the wire off. There are 2 studs here. Each has a 15mm mounting nut, one here, one you can see right behind this hose. This hose is actually held on with a bracket that is right behind that nut, so once we take that nut off, we can also pull this away, unless you want to just pop it off of the retainer here. Having said that, I'm going to get a wrench on here, break it free, and remove this nut. Remove this the rest of the way. pull the mounting nut off. And let's do the same to this other one on the other side of this hose. This one is actually starting to pull out the whole stud, which is fine because I was planning on doing that anyway. Removing the studs will allow us to have more space when removing this alternator. Okay, that stud's out. I'm going to remove it completely from the alternator. The alternator keeps wanting to fall off. That's normal. It's unbolted. There's that stud with the nut. Now to get these studs out, you're going to need an inverted Torx socket, more specifically an E8 socket. That way you can get on the splines of the stud here with that socket, break it free, and remove it. Once you get that on there, they shouldn't be very tight. They're just snugged up into the aluminum head, so it's not like you're fighting a ton of pressure, unless they're severely corroded, of course. Hopefully that is not the case for you. I'm going to have to hold this alternator because it's going to want to keep sliding off, which is going to be an issue. That's out. Try to get the stud out of the alternator. And now, if you tilt this, you'll be able to remove that pulley that we undid from underneath. Pull that whole bolt out with the pulley and everything. Okay, so there's that. And now, we just have to sneak the alternator up through here, and out it comes. Move this wiring harness aside, pull out the dipstick if needed, just so you don't break the end of it. There it is. All right. There's the alternator. To get the stud separated from this mounting nut that didn't want to come off, put a wrench on it and use that socket that you used to remove the stud and thread the nut on a little bit. Once you thread it on, you'll see that it exposes some clean threads. Wire wheel these, and then once you wire wheel them, the nut should come off a whole lot easier. With these wire wheeled, the mounting nut comes off with no tools. There you go. Now take the new alternator and slide it in the same exact way that the old one came out. Of course, it's going to be a challenge, just like when removing it, but it is what it is. Let's get it in. Oh. Well, somehow that just slid right in, but yeah, let's turn it. Oops. There we go. All right, so now, before it goes in too far, I need to put in that pulley with the bolt on the bottom. Okay, let's take that pulley with the bolt, flip the alternator up a little bit, try to get the bolt started right in here. All right, you can't go all the way with it because this area needs to slide over that bracket, but you need to get the bolt started. Otherwise it won't fit because of the frame. And now we have to set it in position here so we can start the two studs up top. If you can, push the alternator over the bracket on the bottom and get that bolt started that goes through the pulley. That is actually going to allow you to pivot it on that bracket, but it's pretty much impossible to see from up here. I'm going to try, but if I can't get it, we'll just do the studs first. Oh, I think I got it. All right, so after quite a bit of struggling and trial and error, finally got that bottom bolt lined up. I'm able to get a wrench on it from up here, and I'm going to just snug it up about halfway, just so that this alternator can pivot but not fall off again. Now you'll be able to pivot the alternator on that bottom bolt to get those two top studs lined up. All right, I got this one started. Let's continue tightening it just so that it's in most of the way, if not all the way. I'm just gonna snug it. You don't have to tighten these studs a lot, because what happens is as soon as you put on the mounting nut, it actually clamps this part down and it wants to pull the stud out, so automatically both ends get tightened. So just bottom it out, give it 1/8 of a turn after it bottoms out at most, just make it snug. Now let's get the other stud in as well. Now remember, this one went through this bracket for this power steering hose, so you're gonna have to get that on as well. That's the bracket right there. And because I have this other stud in and lined up, as well as that bottom bolt in and lined up, this one should line up a whole lot easier. Yeah, there we go. It's already starting in smoothly, so I'll just thread it in all the way. Oh, that just bottomed out. Give it a little extra, and that should be plenty tight. Now I'm going to try my best to torque these studs. The torque for them is 80 inch-pounds. You probably can't get most torque wrenches in here. I have a little 1/4 inch torque wrench. Hopefully it's going to work. Okay, so that one by hand I got it to, well, I would say within a couple inch-pounds of 80. Let's see if I can get the other one. All right. That one is also torqued to 80 inch-pounds. Now let's get the two mounting nuts on. I'm going to just quickly snug these by hand so I make sure they're bottomed out. Then I'll try my best to torque them. These are going to be difficult to torque just because of space limitations, but I will try. 43 foot-pounds is the torque for these. If you don't have a torque wrench that can fit in here, just make them nice and tight with a wrench or a ratchet, whatever you're using. That's one. Unfortunately, I cannot get to the other one, so I'm just going to estimate 43 foot-pounds by hand with a long wrench. I got decent leverage on this, so I'll just make it nice and tight. That should be plenty tight. Might as well finish up top here. So let's get this wiring harness resituated. Get our dipstick back, if you removed it. Okay, and now get the main power wire back down here. Before you connect it, make sure that it's clean. Mine looks very good, so I'm good to go. If it's corroded, sand it down. Make sure it's gonna have a good connection. Line it up and slide it over. Thread on the new mounting nut provided with the starter. Now grab a wrench or a socket, whatever you're using, and tighten up this mounting nut. When you tighten it, just snug it up really quick. You don't want to over tighten these because they will break the stud internally in the alternator. So right here, it bottomed out. Give it about 1/8 of a turn at most. You can see it even spun the wire, so I'm actually going to try to hold this wire so that it's straight up and down. Tighten this, and that should be good to go. Now get this boot reattached so that I can be covered from any potential debris as well as moisture. Now plug in this electrical connector at the front for your regulator. There we go, make sure that clicks. Remove the oil filler cap, put the engine cover back on. Resecure the oil filler cap. Let's reattach the coolant overflow as well as this AC line. There was a hose going on to the overflow tank. Reattach that, make sure it's bottomed out. Put this back over here and this over here. Let's put the bolts back. Like I said at the beginning, all three were the same, so it doesn't matter which one you put where. Just snug them up. You don't want to crack the plastic tank. Back underneath, let's tighten up this 15mm bolt. .43 foot-pounds is also the torque for this. Unfortunately, because of the tight clearance between the frame rail and that bolt, I cannot fit my torque wrench in there. So the only way to do it is if you had a crow's foot or a low-profile torque wrench. I don't have either. So what I'm going to do is take this low-profile ratchet and just estimate 43 foot-pounds. Just make it nice and snug between 1/8 and 1/4 of a turn after it bottoms out. Should be plenty. So right about there. Take this out, and now we can put the belt on. All right, so this is the best view I can give you. On that side right there is the power steering pump, which is slightly out of the frame here. However, on the screen, you'll see a diagram of exactly how this belt is supposed to go. I'm gonna go up and over the water pump here, and then this is supposed to go over the alternator, and then from the alternator around this idler pulley that we just bolted on, but also around the AC compressor at the bottom. I'm gonna leave it on the AC compressor, but not on that idler. And now I'm just gonna manually pull some tension on it to ensure that it's seated everywhere, and it looks like it is. So now with that 1/2" ratchet, stick it in the tensioner and apply or release some tension so we can install the belt all the way. Got myself a slightly longer 1/2" ratchet so I can get some more leverage. That'll make things easier. All right, there we go. Okay, so it's not perfect. I have to recenter it here. There we go. I have to double check the ribs on all the pulleys. Looks like everything is seated perfectly. So the belt is installed. However, I will check it again once the vehicle runs and the engine turns over a couple times. I'm going to make sure that it is still seated on all the ribs. That way it doesn't accidentally fall off, because if it does, it can cause some damage. Let's get this shield back. And there are supposed to be 2 push clips here actually. So I'm going to reinstall this one that I took out, but I also have this other one that I'm going to use to replace the one that was missing. There we go, that's secured now. If you took the wheel off, put it back on. Start on all 6 of your lug nuts, bottom them out in a cross pattern, and also in a cross pattern, torque them to 140 foot-pounds. Here we go, 140 foot-pounds in a cross pattern. Take that negative battery terminal and reconnect it onto the battery now. Make sure it's bottomed out so that there's a good connection between the battery and the terminal here. Tighten this mounting nut back up. Once it gets snug, give it a little bit extra, and that's it. If you cannot move this terminal independently of the battery post, you're good to go. You don't need to over tighten this. It will break. Take this cover, put it back here, and make sure that it actually goes in to that little hook on that side and drops down here so we can put this bolt through. Start that in by hand and snug it up with your T20 Torx socket. Put this cover back on here. Has a hook here and a couple hooks on the back. Make sure everything is lined up. Tap it down and put back the carpet, the mat, and there you have it. Now you can turn on your vehicle and make sure it all runs right.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.